The station's observation deck gives me a panoramic view of Earth as it settles into something unrecognizable. Yesterday, the asteroid struck with catastrophic force, leaving Earth scarred and broken. Cities, landscapes, everything below is now a charred wasteland, blanketed in smoke and dust. The planet itself has been left unrecognizable, its surface a vast stretch of ruin and silence. This view used to show coastlines, cities, lights tracing civilizations I thought would outlast me. Now it's just smoke, ash, and silence. No glow from cities, no sign that anyone survived. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The station wasn't built to be anyone's salvation. We were just a routine crew of 3, rotating through the usual 6-month mission. Myers, Morse, and I had been sent up to continue the standard research, monitoring radiation, conducting experiments, running diagnostics. Just another shift, another team rotation. We were supposed to finish our stint and go back to Earth like every crew before us. But then the asteroid hit, and Earth vanished beneath it. Now, instead of just completing our term, we're stuck in orbit, staring down at a world that no longer exists. I sit, watching the clouds turn dark over where New York used to be, wondering if they're filled with ash or just what's left of civilization. Dr. Allison Morse, the mission's lead scientist, comes up beside me. She stands close, her hands behind her back, staring with a clinical indifference that unsettles me. "Captain," she says, not even looking my way, "we're in a delicate situation. Supplies are limited. Systems are already showing signs of strain." She's right, but it's the way she says it that bothers me. Like we're running an experiment, not clinging to survival. I think she's talking about the water recycler, which has already gone out twice this week, or maybe the oxygen tanks that lost pressure 2 hours after the impact. Everything feels fragile up here, and I can't tell if the feeling's coming from inside me or if the whole station's ready to collapse. "We'll manage, run diagnostics, make repairs," I say, the words sounding as hollow as they feel. She nods, but stays silent, her eyes still on Earth, like she's studying it under a microscope. I know Morse. She's not here to comfort or console. She's the kind who's already calculating how long we have left, and from the way she's tapping her thumb against her knuckle, I can guess the answer isn't good. The crew is small, but volatile. There's Chief Engineer Matt Myers, who's been here the longest, maybe too long. I can see it in his face. Lines cut deeper than they should be for someone his age. He's been mumbling to himself, and I swear I caught him staring at the recycler longer than necessary yesterday. He talks about repairs constantly, like it's the only thing tethering him to sanity. But something's changed. I've seen his hands shaking when he works on the consoles, his eyes darting from corner to corner, as if he's expecting a crack in the walls to just open up and take us. And then there's Morse. She started rationing meals tighter than necessary, claiming it's for preservation purposes. I can see the frustration building in Myers, his muttered complaints growing sharper when he thinks I'm not paying attention. Morse doesn't seem to notice, or if she does, she doesn't care. Myers' voice crackles through the intercom from the maintenance deck. "Captain, got a problem down here. Life support's taking a hit." I glance at Morse, who's already looking at me with that same unblinking gaze. I leave her on the observation deck and make my way down. The air on the maintenance deck is stale. Myers stands over the life support console, scratching his head and muttering to himself. I can see the readings flashing, showing low oxygen levels. He turns as I approach, his face pale, sweat lining his brow despite the chill. "Life support's acting up. Filters aren't holding steady pressure. Might be a crack in the system or just something else." He trails off, staring at the controls like they're written in a foreign language. "Something else?" I press, hearing the frustration creeping into my voice. He looks away. "Could be a simple fault, but it might not be. These systems weren't built to last, Captain." I know what he means. He's talking about our little modifications, quick repairs we had to do ourselves after the asteroid hit and shook us like a tin can. "Fix it," I say, trying to sound calm, but I can tell Myers hears the edge in my voice. He grumbles something I don't quite catch before he starts fumbling with a wrench. Morse appears in the doorway, watching us like a hawk. She crosses her arms, expression cold. "Any updates, Myers?" Myers tenses up, and for a moment, I think he's going to snap. Instead, he shoves his wrench back in his tool belt and mutters, "Working on it." She raises an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Do it faster. Supplies won't wait for you." Myers glances at me, his jaw tight, but says nothing as he goes back to his work. Morse doesn't move, just watches him like she's measuring his worth against our rations. It makes my skin crawl, seeing her assess him as if he's just another expendable part. A few hours later, we lose pressure in one of the oxygen tanks. The warning light blinks red, a silent alarm as I stare at the numbers dropping on the console. I'm doing mental math, calculating how much air we have left if it's not a simple fix. A couple of days, maybe less, if it's as bad as Myers thinks. The crew gathers in the mess hall. No one's eating, they just sit, staring down at plates of rationed protein blocks, barely nibbling. Myers is fidgeting with a nut and bolt in his hand, rolling it between his fingers, while Morse sits stiffly across from him, her expression blank. Her silence unnerves me more than anything she could say. I clear my throat. We're dealing with limited air. Everyone needs to cut down on movement. We need to keep CO2 levels low. That means conserving breath, rationing even tighter. Myers' eyes flash with anger. "How much tighter, Captain? We're already down to half portions." "We're not going to last long if we don't." Morse interrupts, her voice even and cold. "We've got to be realistic." He glares at her, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Easy for you to say. You're the one setting the rules." She raises an eyebrow, unfazed. "You think I'm hoarding rations, Chief? Feel free to search my quarters." The tension in the room thickens. I try to diffuse it, saying, "We're all in this together. This is about survival, not suspicion." Myers doesn't look convinced. Morse meets my gaze, her expression unreadable. I can't tell if she's testing us, pushing just to see if we'll crack. The thought makes my stomach twist. I return to the observation deck later, needing space. Alone, I look down at the ashen wasteland that used to be Earth, wondering what's left there. The silence feels heavier than the lack of air, like something pressing against my chest, reminding me that this view might be the last I ever see. The thought circles back to the crew, to Myers and Morse, to that spark of hostility in Myers' eyes. Isolation does things to people. It makes them see enemies where there aren't any, makes them feel trapped, like they have to fight their way out even when there's nowhere to go. I've seen it before in survival training, but that was on Earth, with an end in sight. There's no end here, just empty space. I catch myself wondering if Morse is right. If rationing our air, our food, our movements down to nothing is really survival, or if it's just dragging out a slow death. I force myself to push the thought away, but it's there, lodged in the back of my mind like a splinter. We're not just losing supplies and air, we're losing time. And each minute brings us closer to that final, desperate moment when we have to decide, is there even a point to holding on? The cracks are getting harder to ignore, both in the station and among the crew. It's been days since we lost that oxygen tank, and Myers' repairs have barely kept us running. Every breath feels heavier. Every piece of equipment, every system, it's all a little too old, a little too overworked, like us. I'm starting to think Morse was right about rationing. We're already down to minimal supplies, and each time I pass a console, I catch myself eyeing the fuel levels, the power reserves, recalculating how long we can last. Each calculation comes out shorter than the last. Myers is waiting for me in the maintenance bay. He's been down here since yesterday, wrestling with the recycler again, swearing under his breath. He looks up as I enter and I see something desperate there, like a cornered animal. "We're screwed, Captain," he says, his voice almost a growl. "The recycler's on its last legs. It's not just the filters, it's the whole damn system. The parts are failing, and we're out of spares. I nod, but he's not done. And Morse, she's hoarding. You know it, don't you? I saw her sneaking off with extra rations, and when I confronted her, she gave me that same dead-eyed stare and walked off. She's treating us like lab rats. I don't know if he's right. Morse has been strange. She goes about her work with clinical precision, talks about rationing and sustainability like we're figures in a dataset. But hoarding? The idea feels far-fetched, even for her. We need to keep our focus, Myers. This station won't hold together if we turn on each other. Focus? He laughs, a harsh, bitter sound. Focus on what, Captain? Dying slower? He spits the words out, each syllable laced with venom. You think rationing's going to change anything? You know how this ends. We suffocate or we starve. Part of me wants to argue, tell him to snap out of it, to do his damn job. But the other part, the part that knows he's not entirely wrong, just watches him silently as he storms past me, muttering curses I pretend not to hear. A few hours later, the lights go dark. Emergency lighting kicks in, casting everything in a red glow. I reach for the intercom, hoping for a quick explanation, but the only sound is static. My stomach sinks as I realize the power is draining faster than we thought. I head to the control room, where Morse is working at a console, her face lit by a dim screen. She doesn't look up when I enter, her fingers tapping at the screen, muttering calculations to herself. It's only when I clear my throat that she finally acknowledges me, glancing up with a look of mild annoyance. Another power drain? I ask, trying to keep my tone even. She sighs, rubbing her temples. Yes, the reserve batteries are failing faster than we anticipated. I've been trying to reroute power to essential systems, but it's like fighting a losing battle. She pauses, her voice softening. We're down to critical levels, Captain. At this rate, we'll be out of power in a week, maybe less. There's a part of me that wants to grab her, to shake her and demand answers. Why does she seem so calm? Why does she keep running those numbers like she's already accepted we're doomed? What are you not telling me, Morse? I ask, my voice low. She meets my gaze, unflinching. I've been running simulations. Based on the supplies, oxygen levels and power reserves, we only have enough for 2, if we ration aggressively. I've been trying to optimize our survival prospects, and I believe we'll have to make hard decisions soon. Hard decisions? My voice rises despite myself. You're talking about killing people. She doesn't flinch. I'm talking about survival. If we want any chance of making it out of here, we need to act rationally. Rationally. She's sitting here, calmly suggesting we turn on each other to save a few scraps of air, a few days of power. And the worst part is, I don't know if she's wrong. Over the next few days, everything continues to fall apart. The oxygen recycler breaks down again, and Myers is nowhere to be found. I search the station, the stale air suffocating me, my breaths coming in shallow gasps as I make my way through each section. I finally find him in the storage bay, rummaging through crates, muttering under his breath. He doesn't see me at first, too focused on his task, but when he looks up and spots me, there's a wild, manic gleam in his eyes. Looking for something? I ask, trying to keep my tone calm. He laughs, a hollow sound that makes my skin crawl. Just checking the rations, Captain, making sure no one's misplaced anything. His voice is laced with accusation, and I don't miss the way he glances toward the door as if expecting Morse to walk in at any moment. I take a step closer, forcing myself to stay calm. We're all feeling the strain, Myers, but this isn't helping. He narrows his eyes, his fingers twitching against the crate. You think I don't know that? I'm not stupid, Captain. I know what's going on here. Morse is playing her little games, keeping secrets, running numbers while we're all gasping for air. He's not entirely wrong. Morse has been distant, withdrawn, obsessively focused on her calculations. But that doesn't justify Myers' paranoia, his growing fixation on the idea that she's hiding something from us. We need to work together, Myers, I say, trying to reach him. Whatever Morse is up to, we'll handle it. But this isn't the time to start turning on each other. His laugh is bitter, a broken sound. Maybe you can afford to play nice, Captain, but me, I'm not dying because some scientist decided we're expendable. That night, I wake up to alarms sounding, red lights flashing across the station. The oxygen levels are plummeting, the recycler completely offline. Panic seizes my chest as I rush to the control room, where Morse is frantically working at the console. "What happened?" I demand, barely able to hear myself over the alarms. "The recycler. It's done. I tried bypassing the failsafe, but it's gone, Captain. We're running on the emergency air tanks now." "How long?" I ask, the question coming out in a whisper. She hesitates, glancing at the numbers flashing on the screen. "A few days, at most. If we conserve, maybe longer. There's no backup plan, no hidden cache of oxygen waiting to be discovered. We're running on borrowed time, and we both know it." I look at her, searching for any hint of reassurance, any sign that she's got a plan, a way out. But all I see is the cold, clinical gaze of someone who's already accepted the inevitable. "We'll have to cut down movement, conserve as much as possible," she says, her voice distant, detached. "I'll need to run more calculations, reassess our projections." I nod, barely hearing her. My mind is racing, 1,000 thoughts colliding at once, each one more desperate than the last. There's no way out of this. We're trapped and suffocating while floating above a dead planet. Over the next few days, the crew falls silent. Conversations are rare, brief, punctuated by long stretches of tense, suffocating silence. We move through the station like ghosts, each one of us lost in our own thoughts, our own fears. Myers avoids Morse, casting dark looks her way whenever they cross paths, his suspicion turning into something darker, more dangerous. And Morse. She's retreated into her calculations, spending hours in the control room, muttering to herself, searching for some hidden answer, some way out that only she can see. I watch her, wondering if she knows something we don't, if she's found a way to survive, to escape this nightmare. But every time I approach her, she brushes me off, her gaze distant, unfocused. Whatever she's looking for, it's something she's not willing to share. I try to stay focused, to keep the crew together, but it's a losing battle. The oxygen levels are dropping, the power reserves dwindling. Every system is failing one by one, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. Each night I lie awake, listening to the sound of my own breathing, the shallow gasps that feel heavier with each passing hour. I wonder how much longer we have, how many more days, more hours, before the air runs out, before we're left with nothing but silence. And as I lie there, staring up at the ceiling, I can't shake the feeling that Morse was right. That survival isn't just about holding on. It's about letting go, accepting the inevitable, facing the end with dignity. But that's not something I'm ready to do. Not yet. Not while there's still air left to breathe. The silence feels heavier each day. Every breath is rationed now, every movement measured. I've stopped counting meals because it's easier than watching them shrink down to nothing. The station's a dead thing, really, just an empty shell barely keeping us alive. Each corridor, each compartment, even the mess hall, it all reeks of the end. And each of us, in our own way, knows it. I haven't seen much of Myers. Morse has been holed up in the control room again, back to her endless calculations. Her eyes have taken on a glassy look, something beyond fatigue. Paranoia is getting to her too, though she hides it behind that cold stare. Myers' accusations still echo in my head, though I know I have bigger problems than his suspicions. Today, it's another failure. The lights dim, then settle into a dull, red hue as the station kicks over to emergency power. I hear the shudder of vents stopping as the life support system gasps and falls silent. I find Myers by the recycler, just standing there, hands limp at his sides, staring at the empty console with a look I can't quite place, some mix of rage and despair. "It's done for, Captain," he says without turning. "There's nothing left. Filters are shot, pressure's dropping. We're done." I nod, even though I already knew this was coming. "We'll have to share what's left in the emergency tanks." He laughs, bitter and ragged. You really think that'll save us? It's a damn joke. His face twists in anger, and I see a gleam in his eyes that worries me. Morse. This is on her. She's the one who's been rationing, the one deciding who lives and who... Enough! My voice is sharp, cutting through his rant. I don't have the patience for this. We're all in the same hell, Myers. She's just doing what she thinks is right. Right? He spits the word like poison. Is that what you call it? Watching us starve, bleed the air down to nothing while she locks herself away? She's no better than that damned asteroid. Drop it, I say, trying to keep my temper in check. But I know I'm losing control. We're all losing control. Myers stares at me for a moment, then shoves past, muttering under his breath as he heads toward the mess hall. I watch him go, wondering if this is it, if this is where it all falls apart. A few hours later, it does. I'm heading toward the control room, hoping to get an update from Morse, when I hear the crash of metal, a loud thud followed by shouting. I break into a run, my pulse hammering as I round the corner into the mess hall. Myers has Morse cornered against the wall, one hand gripping her arm, his face twisted in rage. On the floor is a toppled tray, bits of stale protein blocks scattered across the floor. You think you're better than us, don't you? Myers spits, his voice thick with venom. Sitting up there, doing your little calculations while the rest of us suffocate. Morse's face is blank, her eyes cold. She doesn't resist, doesn't fight back, just stares at him with that detached gaze that makes my skin crawl. Let go, Myers, you're acting like a child. Her tone only fuels his anger. His grip tightens, and for a moment I think he might hit her. I step forward, my voice hard. Myers, back off. He glances at me, eyes wild, and I can see the thin thread of control slipping. Back off? She's the one who's got us rationed to crumbs, Captain. She's the one deciding who lives and who dies. I place a hand on his shoulder, keeping my voice calm. Let her go, now. There's a tense silence, and for a moment I think he might turn on me. But then he lets go, stepping back with a look of disgust. Morse straightens, rubbing her arm. You're all insane, Myers mutters, shaking his head. Every last one of you. He storms out, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. I turn to Morse, who's already gathering up the scattered rations with clinical precision, as if nothing happened. We can't keep doing this, I say. She looks up, her expression unchanged. This is survival, Captain. Nothing more. That night, I lie awake, my mind a tangled mess of doubts and fears. The air feels thin, each breath coming a little harder than the last. I can hear Myers' voice in my head, accusing Morse, accusing me, blaming everyone but himself. And I wonder if he's right. Morse isn't helping. She's become something mechanical, driven by numbers and calculations, devoid of empathy. It's like the asteroid stripped her down to some kind of pure survival instinct, something that doesn't care about morality or mercy. And maybe that's what we need, but it scares the hell out of me. I close my eyes, trying to block it all out, but the thought lingers. How long before I have to make that choice? How long before I'm forced to decide who lives and who doesn't? The next day, I find Morse in the control room, running her calculations again. She doesn't even acknowledge me when I enter, her attention fixed on the numbers flashing across the screen. What's the plan, Morse? How long can we hold out? She doesn't answer right away. When she does, her voice is calm, almost indifferent. With the emergency air, 3 days. 4, if we're lucky. I feel a cold knot in my chest. And after that? She looks at me. After that, we run out. Simple as that. Simple. The word feels like a slap. And what do you suggest we do? Just wait? She shrugs, turning back to the console. There's nothing else to do. This station wasn't built for long-term survival. We're already on borrowed time. Her words hang in the air, cold and final. I want to shake her, to make her understand that we're not just numbers, not just data points in her calculations. We're people. I leave the control room, my mind churning. There's no way out of this, no miracle solution. just the slow, inevitable decline of everything we once were. That night, the breaking point finally arrives. I'm awakened by the sound of shouting coming from the corridor. I grab my jacket, pull it on, and make my way toward the sound. In the mess hall, I find Myers and Morse locked in a deadly standoff. Myers is clutching a pair of medical shears, his fingers white around the handle, his face is twisted, veins standing out at his temples, the hint of a dare in his eyes. Morse stands across from him, back straight, her chin raised, her expression like carved ice. He speaks low, almost to himself. "You think you get to decide who lives and who dies, don't you? Sitting up there, doing your little calculations, rationing us into corpses." Morse's expression remains unmoved. Her voice is calm, eerily so. "I'm trying to keep us alive, Myers. Something you clearly don't understand." He takes a slow, measured step toward her, and I realize he's past reasoning. I barely have time to react, moving forward and catching his arm, yanking it back with a tight grip. The shears fall, clattering to the floor between us. "Enough," I say, my voice firm. "This isn't going to help any of us." Myers struggles in my hold, his voice thick with barely restrained fury. "She's bleeding us out, Captain. Bit by bit, ration by ration, she's killing us." I tighten my grip, steady but unyielding. "And what would you have us do, Myers? Let it all collapse? She's doing what she can to keep this place from turning into a tomb." He glances at me, the anger in his eyes edged with something else. Betrayal, maybe. "You're blind, Captain. She's playing God, deciding who deserves to live and who doesn't. And you're just letting her." The accusation hangs in the air, and I feel it settle into my chest like a stone. I know Morse's methods are cold, maybe even ruthless, but they're the only thing keeping us here. Yet I can't deny that a part of me resents her for it, for what we've all become. Scraps of life, fed breath by breath. Myers breaks free, his shoulder slamming against mine as he storms out, his footsteps sharp in the heavy silence. I turn to Morse, who has already bent down, gathering the scattered rations with mechanical precision, her face a blank mask. "This isn't going to work, Morse," I say quietly, almost to myself. She glances up, her eyes cool, detached. "We don't have a choice, Captain. If we want to survive, we have to be willing to make sacrifices." Sacrifices? The word feels bitter on my tongue, like something hollowed out. What you're doing isn't survival. It's slow death. She doesn't answer, just turns back to her console, her fingers tapping as she resumes her calculations. And I realize, with a cold certainty, that she's already made her choice. She's chosen survival over humanity, numbers over lives. Maybe that's the only way to get through this, but I can't bring myself to accept it. As I leave the control room, an emptiness settles in my chest, spreading like frost. We're not just losing air, food, or power. We're losing ourselves. Bit by bit, breath by breath, we're becoming something cold and broken. And I'm not sure there's anything left worth saving. The silence is suffocating. I'm counting my breaths, feeling each one pull the station closer to emptiness. There's no telling exactly when the last gasp will come, but we're close. The station feels like a steel coffin drifting in orbit, and the chill in the air has nothing to do with temperature. I've avoided it as long as I could, but there's no more denying it now. We're out of options. All we have left is a single escape pod, a relic of the station's original design, meant for one-way emergency evacuations. It's our last shot, slim as it is. If Earth's gone, uninhabitable, then it's the final nail. But if there's even a sliver of a chance... I call the crew together in the mess hall, the place where we used to gather for meals that are now nothing but memories. Myers is slumped over a chair, looking like he's barely keeping it together. Morse sits upright, calm, detached as always. She doesn't meet my eyes when I start speaking. We're out of time. The oxygen will be gone in hours. Food, water, we might have days. Less if the recycler gives out completely. There's one pod, and I'm asking us to vote on whether we use it to attempt a landing on Earth. One last chance. Morse looks at me, her face expressionless, but I can feel the weight of her gaze. "A landing," she says, her tone neutral. "You know as well as I do, Captain. Earth might be uninhabitable, and even if it isn't, the pod wasn't designed for a full re-entry. It's a risk with almost no chance of survival." Myers lets out a short, bitter laugh. "So sitting up here, breathing each other's last exhales. I'd rather take my chances down there than rot in orbit." Morse's jaw tightens, but she doesn't respond. I see the barest hint of something in her eyes, a conflict she's too proud to voice aloud. She's right to be wary. The pod's a gamble. It was never meant for a full descent, just emergency evacuations to a nearby base or shuttle. But the choice is between almost certain death here and the faintest chance down there. I swallow, glancing between the two of them. "Then we vote," I say. "We all need to agree." Myers' hand goes up without hesitation, a slight tremor in his fingers. I raise mine, meeting Morse's eyes, waiting for her response. Her hand stays down. "Captain," she says, her voice flat, "I'll be staying aboard the station." The words hit me harder than I expected. She'd rather take her chances in this decaying shell, stretching out those last breaths and sips of water alone, instead of the unknown below. I want to argue, convince her, but I know Morse too well. Her mind's made up. "All right," I say, forcing myself to accept it. "Myers and I will go. Morse, if there's anything left when we land, if there's any chance, we'll find a way to get a signal back to you." She gives a faint nod. "Good luck, Captain. Myers." Myers mutters something, then turns away, as if he can't bear to look at her. And just like that, our last mission's set. The pod's a cramped metal shell, barely big enough for us to fit. If we're lucky, it'll keep us alive long enough to hit Earth's surface. The launch is rudimentary. Morse helps us run the pre-flight checks, her hands steady on the console, her gaze cool and detached. When she's finished, she takes a step back, looking at us with that same expression she's worn for as long as we've been here. "Goodbye, Captain," she says simply. There's no sentiment, no regret, just words, like a formality. I nod, struggling to find something to say. "Stay safe, Morse." She nods once, then turns and walks away. Just like that. Myers and I settle into the pod, locking in the harnesses, strapping ourselves down for what's bound to be the most brutal landing either of us has ever experienced. I glance at him, and he gives a small, humorless grin. Hell of a way to go out, isn't it? I manage a weak chuckle. "If we make it, first round's on me." He nods, and I can see something settle in him. Some small, fragile thread of hope. Or maybe just the relief of finally doing something. Of not sitting around waiting for death. I close my eyes, brace myself, and hit the launch command. The pod jolts, a sharp, teeth-rattling shake as it detaches from the station. We're spinning at first, disoriented, but the pod stabilizes enough to set our course. I steal a last look at the station through the tiny viewport, a drifting relic, its shape barely visible against the endless void. Morse is up there now, alone, fading into the dark. Our descent starts rough and only gets worse. The pod rattles, heat building as we breach the outer atmosphere. The walls groan, the temperature spiking to unbearable levels despite the insulation. Every jolt feels like a hammer blow, and I can hear Myers beside me, muttering under his breath. Prayers, curses, something between the two. I grip my teeth, trying to hold on, every fiber of my being focused on surviving each second. I brace myself as I fire up the pod's engines, forcing them past their limits to slow our descent. The thrusters kick in with a shudder, vibrating through the entire structure as I push the pod to hold steady. The atmospheric pressure builds, a suffocating weight pressing in from every angle. I know the engines weren't meant for this, but we've got no choice. It's this or a dead drop. Myers grips the edge of his seat, his knuckles white, his breathing shallow and fast. Come on," he mutters, as if his words alone could hold the pod together. The temperature spikes as we hit the lower atmosphere. The smell of burnt metal fills the cabin, and the view outside turns into a blur of fiery streaks and flashing alarms. I feel the pod start to buckle and shift in the turbulence, the engines wheezing against the pressure. I've got them running at full power, but we're still descending fast. Too fast. A blaring warning flashes on the console. "Brace!" I say, my voice is lost in the noise. Myers barely has a chance to react. The pod lurches violently as we lose thrust in one of the engines, dropping us into a near freefall for a few seconds before the remaining engines engage, just enough to cushion us before impact. The pod slams into the ground, a brutal bone-rattling hit that sends me jerking against my harness. I feel the snap of something in my shoulder, a white-hot pain radiating down my arm, and everything goes dim for a moment. When the dust settles, there's an eerie, deadly quiet. I force my eyes open, fighting through the haze, struggling to make sense of the surroundings. I hear the groan of metal around me, but everything else is still. "Myers!" My voice comes out hoarse. I turn to look at him, and the sight makes my heart sink. His harness didn't hold. At the moment of impact, the buckle must have failed, flinging him forward. His body is slumped against the console, his head resting at an unnatural angle, eyes open and unfocused. There's a line of blood tracing down his temple, pooling against his collar. I feel a sick lurch in my stomach. He never had a chance. I close my eyes, pushing away the surge of nausea. There's no time for grief, no room for anything but survival. Slowly, I reach for my own harness, wincing as I work it open with one hand, my injured shoulder throbbing. Each movement feels like fire along my nerves, but I manage to unbuckle myself, pressing against the console to steady my balance. The emergency hatch is jammed halfway open from the impact. I grip my teeth, gripping the edge and forcing it the rest of the way. The moment it gives, a gust of thick, acrid air rushes in, filling the pod with the stench of something burnt and foul. I take a shallow breath, my lungs protesting at the strange taste in the air. I pull myself out, collapsing onto the ground outside. The impact jarred me harder than I thought. My sight is hazy, my limbs feel heavy, sluggish. I push myself up to a sitting position, rubbing the dust from my eyes, trying to take in the landscape around me. It's nothing but wasteland. As far as I can see, the ground is flat, barren, cracked like a shattered mirror. The sky hangs low and grey, choked with ash and haze, casting everything in a dim, oppressive light. There are no signs of life, no sounds but the faint, unsettling whine of the wind whipping over the empty ground. My breathing is laboured, each breath scraping through my chest as if the air itself is turning against me. I cough, my lungs rebelling against the dust and ash, but I force myself to stand, to take a few unsteady steps forward. I look around, straining for any sign of movement, any sign that the earth isn't entirely dead. But there's nothing. Just silence. Silence and desolation stretching endlessly in every direction. The pod lies broken behind me, half buried in the dust like a discarded shell. Myers is still inside, his body a silent reminder of what we've lost, of how close I am to joining him. I don't know how long I stand there, staring out at the wasteland. Earth is gone. Whatever chance I'd clung to, whatever flicker of hope that life might still be waiting for us here, it's as dead as the ground beneath my feet. I let out a slow, shuddering breath, my gaze drifting to the sky, a dull, grey sheet hanging heavy above me. Somewhere beyond that thick haze, Morse is up there in the station, alone, breathing what little air remains. I wonder if she's staring out into the void, clinging to those last moments, wondering what became of us. I hope she doesn't try looking down, doesn't imagine anything other than what's here. There's nothing left to find, just the emptiness and the silence of this dead world. I don't know if she'll last another day, another hour, and maybe it doesn't matter now. I take a step forward, feeling the grit of dust and ash under my boots, the weight of emptiness settling over me. There's nowhere to go, nothing to find, but moving feels better than standing still. The wasteland stretches endlessly before me, an expansive void that seems to go on forever. There's no direction, no destination, just the instinct to keep moving, to keep breathing the bitter air. Because that's all that's left now, one step at a time, with no end, no hope, just movement.